A leadership analysis on Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle and her testimony today. So, leading up to the testimony today, there's been all kinds of investigations, calls from the citizens, from lawmakers, from politicians in every avenue about responses, about information, and about resignation of Kimberly Cheatle. She has stated multiple times, including in today's hearing, that she will not turn in her gun and badge, so to speak, and give over her resignation. Now, I want to examine this from a leadership perspective. So, number one, she has been out there running the Secret Service ever since this event has happened, which is a duty she must uphold. But she refused to state that she would voluntarily come to the hearing of this new task force that's been assigned to quickly come to a solution and investigative finding on what failed in getting former President Donald Trump assassination attempt that close to taking his life. So in doing this, she had to be subpoenaed. So that's leadership failure number one. She knew where her priorities stand. I need to answer for the situation that took place, and I will be wherever is necessary to get to the bottom of this. She even said she would move heaven and earth to make sure this didn't happen again, but she denied responding to a congressional request unless she was given a subpoena, and she wanted to delay it down the road. So that's leadership failure number one. Leadership failure number two. She comes in here and she is asked lots of questions, and many of her questions do not take accountability for her role as head, the director of the agency. So she does a lot of, unfortunately, political rhetoric and answering. She's very much in the CYA version of giving answers, where she just wants to protect her job, wants to protect certain things instead of just being transparent and giving the answers that are necessary. As one of the top law enforcement officials in the country, evidence, facts, and truth need to be of your primary concern, and she's giving some wishy-washy answers throughout. Now, there are many people, both sides of the aisle. That's a leadership point to make, is that very rarely in politics do people agree about very much, but leaders are angry at the failure of another leader, and they're calling from both sides of the aisle for her to resign. That is a major clue. So somebody that wants to take accountability for the actions can understand that if I come out and on the forefront of what I am doing, I take ownership, I do whatever it is to right the wrongs, to provide information, to provide clarity, yeah, I may be able to save my job in doing that as a leader. But if also I am what they have labeled as a colossal failure, the result of that colossal failure, then ultimately my head has got to roll. The head of the agency has got to roll out the door. So this is a pretty big issue. She is claiming a couple of things for us to note. That one, the shooter acted alone. So she has made the statement in her hearing today that the shooter acted alone, that he acted not based on any conspiracy. So if we find out information to the contrary, then she even more shows herself as inept in her job and her ability to interpret intelligence, properly protect people from layers of threats, and ultimately provide accurate information. So here's a good part. There are some goods involved. She did offer an apology to Donald Trump. So that is actually a position of ownership, saying, I apologize for putting you in a situation where the detail failed. That right there is a good leadership maneuver, but also says she recognizes a failure and then should respond accordingly to the failure. I'm looking at a little list over here of some of the questions as I've been watching the hearing as much as I can throughout the workday and looking at some of the other things here. Some interesting things. Unfortunately, I really don't like this, but the truth is the truth. There were people put on this detail that were not appropriately suited to do the job. They had lower levels of training. Some people did not pass all of their training in the required capacity. And then there is just a plain old size difference. Listen to me very carefully. I am very pro-women, and more importantly, pro-women in law enforcement. There's such a huge detail. I was responsible for hiring the first ever female SWAT officer onto our local SWAT team. So I am pro-women, pro-police, pro the duties that can be done. She was able to pass all standards that every other officer putting in the position could pass. These women could not pass that standard. Secondly, on a protective detail of this nature, you've got to have people that can physically block the target and physically carry it. Let's say those 8 shots fired from the suspect hit 8 Secret Service agents, and she was the last man standing. Could she have gotten the president off the X and out of danger, both protecting with her body and pulling with her strength? And the answer is no, because she couldn't pass the original standards required to do that. That is a failure of leadership. That is a failure of leadership. I don't care who you are, man, woman, or whatever. If you can do the job, you can do the job, and you should be appointed to that role to execute the job. If you can't do the job, you're eliminated. I don't care about any other standards from that. The calling of resignation. I do like one leadership thing that has taken out. There's a lawmaker that specifically said, I want to wait to the conclusion of her hearing. I want to hear all of her answers. I want to see all of the evidence. I want the conclusion of this hearing. I'm holding my judgment and calling for her resignation until I have all of the information and I hear from the horse's mouth what she has to say. Well, that also is good leadership. I think people should be able in this circumstance to jump to some conclusion saying you are the point of failure, but I very much respect the person that says, I'm going to wait till I have at least all of the information out of her mouth. And then I want to caveat two things in my next statement. She is not answering a lot of these questions. She's giving what's called non-answers, where she's repeating something or twisting something that's slightly different from the question. And at times, a leader must do this. If I try to trap you into yes or no questions only, that's a very attorney on the stand kind of a thing to do, to try to box you in a corner. And when you add suggestions into those questions, or you add adjectives like colossal, was this a failure? Yes. Was this a colossal failure? Well, I agree, yes, it was, but for somebody to testify to adjectives enhancing the statement to make it as severe as possible, it's very hard for a leader to pin themselves down in yes or no answers. So a leader cannot just be trapped into answering yes and no anyway. So she does a little bit of that good, and then there's other parts where just it's an obvious yes or no answer, and she just kind of rubs her face and says, I don't know, or changes the subject and doesn't answer the question. That's poor leadership, that's dodgy, that's not transparent, that's not trustworthy. And just for some of those actions and just for some of the ways that she answers the questions, she should be investigated as to why she's not resigning, or somebody is not firing her and removing her from her role. I don't know if votes of no confidence can come out from the Secret Service, but that would be a viable option as well, is to have a vote of no confidence in her as a Secret Service director. So she did not answer questions based on what assets were on the scene, what requests. She said no requests were denied, but she's doing that very specific question onto the actual day of the event and not the gross protection of Donald Trump leading up to the event. So you got to be careful in watching people's words and specifically their answers. So I do believe there were denials based on the testimony I saw today, but not specifically till like the day before. Can we get a couple more cops? No, that was, I believe, a truthful statement by her, but a little deceiving in the overall long run. And then the other thing that I want to also caveat is when she is discussing, was this authorized, was this asset given, was this piece of equipment, was this provided? Some of those answers, if she says yes to them, could actually release sensitive information on how dignitaries or VIPs are protected. So if she says, yes, we give drones to everybody, well, then now a counter, an anti American person, a counter sniper or whatever, can now look for drones and they can put into their plan how to mitigate drone technology. If we just say, hey, I can't answer that question, well, then maybe I don't consider a drone technology the next time a bad guy and I get spotted by a drone. So that is a tricky thing to navigate. But again, in this circumstance, I believe the American people are smart enough to realize what is and is not supposed to be supplied on these events, especially after the in-depth nature of the coverage. And she does need to answer 99% of these questions directly. And the 1% she chooses not to, she needs to caveat that that would release sensitive information to the investigation, or that would release sensitive information on how we protect dignitaries, giving a weakness or vulnerability that we don't want to give. So that's my analysis on Kimberly Cheatle. The result is she is getting a D or F on her ability to respond as a leader. Her amount of ownership is nominal. There is some, and her questioning and answering directly is very poor. It is very obvious that she is not the leader for the job and needs to resign. So random Joe Schmo Ryan from Kentucky is calling for Kimberly Cheatle to resign as well.